Good afternoon. So thanks for coming today. We've got a mixture of people I see. So people from our courses here at Morley, we've got people from the public. So when Morley College first originated, the suffragette and philanthropist Emma Cons set up these things called penny lectures. And the idea is that our values are that we have people from the public accessing education, and it's a bastion for adult education. So that's where we're at today. So the format is that you're going to have an hour approximately with Neville Brody, and we'll put aside some time for you to ask questions as well. So yeah, please join me in introducing Neville Brody.
Matt, you said a minute. You actually said 1 minute. Can you hear me at the back if I just talk?
Yes.
Yeah. If you can't,
Do come forward as well, because there are some seats as well.
yeah, it looks like you were scared of me. So how many people here are studying? Can you raise your hands if you're studying? I just want an idea of. Oh, come on, there's more than 5. Can you put your hands up, guys? Are you serious? Thank you. So it's about 60%. And how many of you are staff here? Ooh, those hands went up quick. And then how many is from outside? Oh, blimey. Oh, it's a sort of good 3/3. So I've lost everything. I've just put a load of work together to talk through, and I haven't prepared anything really formal here. So I wanted it a little bit more released, relaxed, informal. I'm a professor at the RCA, which is both up the road and down the road from here, in Battersea, at the White City campus. And then my studio is over in Islington, so this is a strange part of town for me. With a football club we don't talk about. I was actually born in Tottenham, so we may not be getting out of here alive. So I put together a load of thoughts. I'm not sure what you're expecting. I'm not sure how much this has been sort of bigged up. But, I just wanted to talk about a few things, and one of them was we're in a really interesting period right now. I think where so over 100 years ago, what we were doing was called graphic art, and it was decorative posters. It was very illustrative. All the typography was quite illustrative. And then around the time of the First World War, graphic design was sort of born. It came out of Dadaism. So there's a really interesting idea there about how important fine art is to other fields of communication. So Dada was a fine art reaction against warfare, against capitalism, against elite art. And they used all of the current technologies at the time. And this all came together in a kind of hybrid fusion. And graphic design grew out of that. So they took things that were quite new at the time, like half-tone printing, was really new. And then woodblock, hot metal, all of this stuff was becoming more widely accessible, as was the access to camera and film. And in fact, the invention of the camera was quite critical for the birth of what we call modern art, because the camera arrived and then it took away the need for artists to be representing reality or portraiture or even fantasy, because everyone could do it. It democratized it. And then out of Dadaism came constructivism, came Bauhaus, came everything we knew in the 20th century. And then now, about 100 years later, we're in a period where it's becoming what I call graphic engineering. So graphic design was all about posters and book covers and record covers, which is where I grew up. And graphic engineering is much more about creating smooth journeys for the user. So in graphic engineering, they're trying to make sure that as many people as possible are getting from A to B without much interruption. So graphic design sort of gets in the way of that because it makes people think. And to be honest, most clients are not wanting people to think, they just want to get people to the point where then they can deliver another click or a sale or a new thought or to take you somewhere else, but to keep you within that space in the attraction economy. So it's really shifted. Graphic design was there to sort of partner the user or the viewer or the reader, whereas graphic engineering is there to move the user or the reader or the viewer. And it's a different thing. And I'm saying this right at the beginning because then I'm just going to talk through some work. But graphic design is all about expressing content rather than just showing it. So you could take the subject matter and then bring it to life with the way you present it. Whereas graphic engineering is all about delivering content, and that's a very, very different mindset. So a lot of digital work right now is focused on delivering content. Graphic design, which was very much about print and hasn't adapted very well to digital, was all about getting in the way of just blind acceptance of content. So I'm just showing some work here. So this, going through my book recently, I had to go through a lot of archival work. And this was a piece I did when I was at art school. So this was, I don't know, when I was 20 years old maybe. And what I wanted to do was look at what constructivism would feel like if constructivist artists were working today with technology. And all of this has been made capable or possible by technology, and I keep coming back to that. Technology at this point meant lecture set. And lecture set was a great democratizing technology. You could rub down lettering, you could choose different typefaces. And it took it out of the hands of professional typesetters who were controlling everything up until that point. So suddenly, with punk, with 80s, with record covers, all of this, suddenly there was this period of freedom. And like the beginning of the advent of the camera, it allowed people to express themselves. Digital did that at the beginning of the internet. Now it's hard to really control. So this was done at the same time. Screen printing, which again was a great democratizer. Photolitho, lecture set again. And then thinking about how to express content. So this was, again, when I was 20 or 21. There's a series of books. And then the photocopier allowed us to do a lot of experimentation. And I'm sort of showing this because it's so easy to get caught up in coding and the way everything should be. And actually, things are much more interesting when you make them go wrong and when you push them. And I sort of embrace when things aren't necessarily clear. I think that our engagement with people should be a bit more poetic, meaning that advertising and digital media now will give you stuff and not engage in a conversation. So here it's the idea of ambiguity. And I used to do a lot of experimentation with textures, with not trying to dictate what things mean, but you can come in. Not trying to dictate what things mean, but leaving it open so that it's not complete until someone else has made the decision of what that means. So graphic design as a process of engagement for me was always so important. So here it was also thinking about loss of identity in the world of communication, which is an even more extreme situation now. We're becoming so splintered in the way we understand who we are. And it led to things like this. So this early Cabaret Voltaire record cover, I think from 1980, all pre-digital. And then making stuff. So physicality with photography, with printing, with digital technology. We sort of divided these out. And I think it's so important to bring back that tactility and make stuff. And then bring that stuff into other media and keep playing. We tend to be quite blinkered these days. And certainly the RCA were trying to break out of these kind of rigid walls. So here for a record cover for 23 Skidoo, moulded my own hands in plaster, manipulated it, and then made a sort of fake drum on a piece of chicken wire. So it looked like that. That was the final shot that was then turned into a negative, and then this was the final record cover. And this is all, again, physical. And it's all 2-colour printing, because in those days we couldn't afford 4-colour printing for most stuff. So sometimes restrictions can really push your creative thinking. And I'm also showing this is the first time we used the computer. So the type is coming out of dot matrix printers, and it's hard to imagine now how low res our printing capability was then. So it's dot matrix, it was really low resolution, it was just black and white or very coarse halftones. So again, trying to bring a kind of more poetic use of that technology into play. Here, zooming in on one of the spreads from the catalogue. And around the same time, this is for a clothes shop in Ealing, and the fish are made from coat hangers. So, there's ways of using stuff around you in an iconic or suggestive way that you couldn't get out of straight digital processing. And I'm not saying abandon digital. What I'm saying is that everything has its value, and we can cross-fertilize all of those things. So at that time, all the typography we did was pretty much hand-drawn. The computer didn't exist then. So for every headline for a magazine, we would then photocopy. This is zooming in. You had to use paint, and you can't see the grid so much on here. You had to you'd spend all night just filling in all the lettering by hand. And then using Tipex or scalpels to clean the edges. And then it all got photocopied. And then put wax on the back, and then cut each letter out individually. This is me, I'm afraid. You can see it's hand assembling every single headline. So the magazine, every headline would be made by hand like this. Sometimes drawn directly, so each headline could be drawn directly, which meant that we could really play around with the lettering. It wasn't just a pull-down menu. You could actually make changes. And the bottom one is more just about to see, reproduced, cut and pasted. Whole fonts, that we would draw out. Logos. Most of this stuff was for the Face magazine. So everything was drawn and filled in by hand. So you had to imagine in advance what things might look like, because you couldn't suddenly change a bit of lettering once you'd drawn it. And we'd often be finishing stuff with the messenger waiting, bike messenger waiting at the gate, saying, I've only got 5 more minutes, mate. And then they would grab it and rush off to the printer, and then you wouldn't see it until it was in the shop. For Mademoiselle magazine, again, this is all pre-digital. For a watch brand. And then this, and when I came across this again, this was probably 1982, pre-digital. And what I didn't realise then was that a lot of the work that was being done in record covers and in youth magazines at that time was what we call proto-digital. So a lot of the aesthetics that became digital came out of that space. But we were having to imagine this and instruct printers on how to print from physical layers of artwork. I'm going to push through this a bit faster. How are we doing for time? You don't know, I'm checking. I think we're fine.
Yeah, we're good.
19 minutes. So this is just to share that a lot of the work we do that's not commercial in the studio deals a lot with this sense of ambiguity, where there's a sort of intention behind what I'm doing, but it's left in a vague state so that someone coming to it from the other side can bring their own meaning to it. And I do believe very strongly in this process of ambiguity and poetic design. I think it's about a shared experience. And very much concerned with looking at letter forms and the sculptural possibility of letter forms. How far can you push them? Again here, so that's an at symbol. Play, I think we should all be playing a lot more. Matt, how much is based here on like mock commercial briefs, or is it quite open?
So yeah, VTech anyway, they actually encourage that briefs have like a sort of client-based thing. Sometimes we find live briefs, we have live briefs as well.
Okay.
Where we actually find clients.
But not forgetting, of course, that clients tend to also want challenging minds and creative responses. And I think even within that space, I think play is so important. Just play it, just see what comes out. It doesn't matter if it fails completely, but that process is the critical thing, and we try and encourage that as much as possible at the studio. And then sometimes it's about not doing much at all. This is a cover for Plus 81, which is a Japanese magazine. And we realized that just taking the Plus 81 logo, turning it sideways, we've got a face. So sometimes it's not really about doing anything. It's about just a subtle nudge can bring a new thought or a new positioning. And then this is about embracing accidents. We always try and push software to the point where it breaks, or even hardware. Because at the point of breaking, something new happens. And nature is always based on that. Things mutate when things go wrong, and those mutations then become the new form. So always push it to the point of breaking. Learn your trade, but just find that point where it can't cope. So we did this, and we were pushing at the time 3D software to a point where it couldn't actually cope, and it just kind of sort of went wrong and filled in stuff it shouldn't have done. And that, we captured that and made that then a basis for a whole series of pieces of work using that same sort of language that came out of that broken 3D-ness. Like here, so it ended up here as the cover for the Victoria and Albert Museum special on postmodernism. I think you've got, it's over contrast. You can't really see it, but there's more subtlety. Oh, let's come to the next slide. Excellent. So, yeah, it's also lost a bit of subtlety here. And then this was for Isimiaki store in New York. So we took that broken 3D stuff and then really kind of pushed it into. So these were adverts in Vogue and other fashion magazines. And they really stood out by being kind of violent architecture as opposed to luxury models. And this was sort of to reflect the architecture of the building. And it's ended up, this is the inside cover of the book I've just put out, where I'm still trying to push this space. I mean, once you start finding your language as an individual, it's something that you can keep returning to and evolve. And I think that's really important as an individual practitioner. And then again here. So experimentation. And the other thing is, it doesn't matter if you make things difficult for people. Most clients don't want difficult logos, difficult branding systems. But outside that, I think it's okay to make things difficult. We're making things so easy for people right now. And the complexity of the print experience has become so narrow in our social media experience. At the time when we were doing magazines, it was always called word and image. Now it's become image and word, where the image takes priority, and the word is more of a caption, a way of, even it just becomes a means for searching. And then the narrowness of complexity has really gone. We used to make digital technology and digital communication much more complex, much more difficult, much more in depth, but now it's such an instant gratification thing where we're swiping all the time. There's no room or capacity for depth. So as well as difficulty, I also embrace, how do we bring more depth, more inquiry. Sounds like a little lecture, this, doesn't it? I'll lighten up in a minute. So for this, we took digital technology and we created some coding where it would create these more liquid spaces. So we were trying to bring that liquidity of painting back into an unpredictable digital space, and we ended up with these kinds of works. I just like the idea that you just question everything, question all of your tools, question your briefs. This was, again, digital, painterly approach, done in 1994, so this is 30 years old. And I'm only showing it because it feels like digital art hasn't really moved much. So there's a huge opportunity there. What can digital art really be? And it's not just videos, and it's not just content to put in these Instagram windows. Because our framework is so controlled. It's like an office building, and all you can do is do something in the window of the office building. But we need to start grabbing the environment and making it more dynamic. This is from '92 for a poster for a festival in Japan. And then this is done more recently. These are potato prints. So again, where's that crossover point between art making and digital distribution? GQ is a cover for their 10th anniversary in Italy. And we actually forgot to put the cover lines on here, but they thought it was deliberate, so we got away with it. And more recently, we revisited a typeface we created for the big museum in Bonn, in Germany. And it was around an exhibition on postmodernism. We created this font called Bonster. So then exploring that, because I think fonts are really interesting. you can create so many different ideas with creating your own characters and seeing how they work with each other. So there are ways we can do digital takeovers, and I think our own font design is certainly one of those ways. So just playfulness. We're doing a lot of stuff with motion graphics, but yeah, simple stuff. And then I wanted to show a bit about sort of lost space of print, magazine design. And this is, and I've sort of brought this in because so it's Arena On Plus. And again, it's because it's about expressing content. Layout is a way of expressing a story. You have image, you have word, you have graphics. And the way they work together is the way you tell that story. And that's something we've not only forgotten, but with most of our digital media, we're not even allowed to do. There's no capacity for it. So looking at spaces we could, like our own websites, for instance. So here, one issue, this is an article on Madonna. And then the next month, there was an article on Andy Warhol. And we took the opening page and just turned it upside down. So we were commenting on Andy Warhol's use of repeatables. Because in this space, in print, you have consecutive ideas. You have one page to the next page, you have a spread. Then you have a spread to the next spread. Then you have the story to the next story. And then you have one issue to the next issue. So you could create a timeline that was a narrative. In digital media, it doesn't connect in the same way. You can't have juxtaposition in digital media. So how do we rethink that? How do we think about juxtaposition? On Instagram, you might have a series of images, but they don't work in that same sense of juxtaposition. And you can't get scale. So when you're coming to doing digital design, I think it's really important that you kind of keep these engaging ways of communicating with the viewer in mind. So I just wanted to show quickly Arena On Plus. It started with, I grew up in North London, and the big influence there was really kind of 7-inch reggae singles that I grew up with from about the age of 10 or 11. But what I loved about them, obviously apart from the music, was the fact that these needed to sit in a reggae record store, and with very, very limited capabilities, make them graphic enough to stand out. So that graphicness was something that inspired me. We started thinking about how we could bring a different dynamic to the printed page, how we could do stuff with digital at the time that wasn't standard. Could we use shapes to contain images and push the limits? Could we get rid of the grid completely? And then we realised that that was not going to be hugely practical on a day-to-day basis. And what we needed to do was create components. So when we're designing projects for clients or in editorial, there's three things that happen. One is what is the visual system you're creating? Secondly, what are the components that you use? And the font is one of those key components. And then finally, how does it all come together to tell a story? So we boiled it down with Arena On Plus to the fonts, and then chose to explore some experimental treatment of the page. These are all just explorations. And then that's actually one of the pages from the final design. But then we realised that that wasn't enough, and so we created this font called Propaganda. So we were adopting a kind of political tone of voice at the time, but putting it into a more kind of design and editorialised context. And it was about music and it was about fashion, the magazine, so it was appropriate. And then started playing like this. So these are actual spreads from the magazine. And again, we don't mind making things difficult. Turning type sideways, which is difficult in digital spaces. And here it looks chaotic, but it's actually based on quite strong painterly principles. You have the echo of the jacket here is echoed by the headline at the top. You have the figure looking almost like a religious figure looking out of shot, and that's echoed by the small character on the bottom left here. So you have the scale. And then you have this gutter in between where other things are starting to happen. For this, we didn't abandon the grid, but we made the grid so tight that you had to run the headline round. And it actually says Ralph Simmons, 15 years. But by creating a technological limitation, it created a kind of poetic response as an inevitable outcome of it not working properly. So again, making things go wrong. Making things go wrong here, reversing our sense of scale, how it should be to create a different dynamic. So the foreground figure is lower than the smaller background figure. Here, using headlines, again, to create a narrative between the two spaces, echoing the jacket, trying to build a sense of power in Talisa. And here, the quote is kind of slamming into the text. So trying to bring emotive qualities to how all the pieces are coming together. How can you tell a story without telling a story? Thrillers, great pictures by Nick Knight, starred by Simon Foxton. This was actually Club Dorman in tutus. So the story itself was powerful. So the power of imagery, and being able to fill a page with that is, what a luxury. Judy Blaine, the great stylist, this was the only space in his flat where the photographer had enough distance to be able to take the picture, because it's so filled with junk and objects. But again, twisting the type upside down. And here, we're using white space as one of the strong elements on the page. So the white space is acting as a tool of oppression. It's pushing down on the text. It's making it feel constrained. And this whole piece was about Margaret Thatcher's oppressing of youth culture in the 80s. So it's using that white space, that invisible energy, to create a story just by how you divide the spread. And then here it's the reverse, where this kind of tyrannical governing power becomes this kind of toxic, heavy weight at the top of the page. And then words just jump out to pull you in. In the second issue, we took the same typeface and we cut big holes in it because we wanted to go a bit more classical. So suddenly we were wide spacing serif type in here, looking back to kind of a pseudo-classical aesthetic. So everything was centered, but because we'd cut shapes out of the type, they became quite sculptural. So everything then anchored around this kind of sculptural quality, kind of fake grandeur, a lot of silhouetting, but trying to explore the beauty of shape. In our current media, most of it's rectangular or square. But how can we break out of that? And I don't think digital media has won. I'm not giving up yet. I think that we can do stuff. I mean, what if we could do websites that did this sort of stuff? Or posters on the street. And then curating your images. Going through a magazine or even a website should be like watching a movie. It should be a journey that takes you on a series of connected moments, but also surprising moments. How on that journey can we shock or change the story or move the viewer or the user to somewhere else? So how images work with each other becomes critically important, because you could put two images together and it'll say one thing. Take one of those images, put it with another image, it says something completely different. So how do you curate your storytelling? Even with a social media space, how do you actually make a narrative out of that that's compelling? This is just taking the S from the font and repeating it and putting it on top and creating this unexpected and sculptural shape. And the third one we just took, this is a typeface I did in the 80s for a boxing fight by Mike Tyson. And we wanted to make it less masculine and more vulnerable, so we created this Tyson sensitive. And then we used it in a poetic way, where it's interlocking, it's empathetic, it's listening, it's engaged. So this is counter to the spikiness of the boxing thing. And it's about exploring two sides of masculinity and toxic masculinity. And then it starts to do things like this on the page, where we're trying to do something which is more considered, takes a bit more time. And then ironically, there was an interview with a Russian boxer in that issue that we made very sensitive. And most of what we do these days is less about creative front pages or book covers or record covers. It's much more about system building. And then not only system building, but the components. And then within the components, so I did this, which is the Christian Dior monogram. But their brief to us was that it had to work in 180 degrees because they never know which side up something's going to go. So it had to be perfect each way up and symmetrical. It had to be scalable right down to the smallest size and work large on a ceiling of a major store. It needed to echo the values of Christian Dior, so it had a lot of thick and thin. And it also had to work as a single piece, so that they could create belt buckles, clasps, bag clasps, etc. So it looks simple, but there was a huge amount of kind of testing out that went. I mean, it was a 1.5, 2 year project just to get that to that point. So here it's a bag clasp. But we were asked to do, this is the celebration for the 100th year of the bottle. And the bottle is probably the most famous and most successful piece of graphic design there's been in the last 100 and something years. It's so recognisable. Actually, I just came back from Sri Lanka and they still are using the old glass bottles, which is great. So we did this. It was just handmade, actually. And it ended up here in the headquarters in Atlanta. But out of that, they got us to do a typeface. So that apart from the script then, every font that Coca-Cola uses is this font that we created for them. My mum was really happy about it. She was really proud. But she understood this. So all the different weights, but they said to us that they wanted something that was incredibly practical and functional, would work at a really small scale, would be invisible when they needed to be invisible, but with personality if you looked at it large. And we spent 3 days in their archives in Atlanta, which was pretty amazing. I mean, it's huge. Do you know the scene at the end of Citizen Kane? With the big warehouse. It was sort of a bit like that. It was just like endless, thousands and thousands of pieces. So we started to pull out what we thought were Coca-Cola personality from some of the lettering that repeated itself. So specific characteristics. And then it also had to feel very American, whatever that means. So it had a sense of Americana. It couldn't be mistaken for a non-American, like a European or other font. So we got inspired a lot by soda fountains and cafeteria or diner signs in there. And then started to build these characteristics in. The circular form was very important because of the dot, so it had to work with all the other elements. And then here it is, completely invisible. But it somehow captures subliminally what you associate Coca-Cola with, which is everything you've ever seen by them. So there's a sort of whole heritage and narrative that's just built into the type design itself that remains sort of under the surface in terms of awareness. And then we did the same with Channel 4, which is the complete opposite. And they said they wanted to be an irreverent British brand. They wanted to be a very British, but they would always be causing trouble. So we decided at the base of it, we needed a typeface that was particularly British, a very kind of Gothic, grotesque font. So we took inspiration from British Railways, from Margaret Calvert's typefaces for the railway system and hospitals, and Gill and these early European influenced grotesques. And then we did this kind of bastard version of it. So Chadwick is the regular typeface, and you see that on Channel 4 for all of the information. And then Horseferry is what we call the bad family members, the people you wouldn't want to invite for dinner. And we actually imagined a table with like a bad uncle over in the corner. What would they do with it? Well, the cousin who's just got out of jail. And we created this compatible set of companions where Chadwick was the sensible family member and Horseferry was the maverick, the one you couldn't pin down, the one that wouldn't get a job. And that now is the one you see, because what they wanted to do is create a story with Channel 4 where you wouldn't need the logo on everything, that you would recognize who they were by the typeface. And now it's become so synonymous with Channel 4 that you don't even think about it, but you know it's Channel 4 as soon as you see it. So here's the base, and then here are the little things that we've changed in order to create. So it's only small changes in the DNA of this typeface. And then it creates a complete story. So they dropped all of these blocks now, but as soon as you see it on screen, it couldn't be any other broadcaster. So this was the first one we tried with this. And then obviously this is the previous stuff, as you know. But they've expanded now the family of the fonts. I'm going to show you this very quickly. I don't want to go into it in depth, but sometimes we end up having to do these very kind of, again, very engineering processes. So Samsung had so many divisions, and each division had its own visual language, its own icons, its own fonts, its own wording, and they wanted to try and bring it all together. So the first thing we did was help them figure out an approach to all their icons. So we created a grid and a line-based and a proportionate system, so that anyone in the whole of Samsung could use that and create something that felt like part of the language. So it was about bringing Samsung together through a shared icon language. And then we developed the Samsung One typeface, which then at different weights and widths now is the main typeface on every single Samsung screen or object or washing machine or smart TV. And it creates a unified sense of Samsung. Before it was all very different. So we had a very large X height. We created a lot of light and oxygen inside the lettering. Traditionally, you put a lot outside and it forces the positive space to become smaller, but we wanted to push it out. So we weren't dealing with circles, we were pushing out the corners. And then just making sure everything aligned. So here you can see the lettering is deliberately very open. So the C's don't turn around like this. They come up at a much shallower angle. Everything has the same 90 degrees terminal to each stroke, so it becomes very, I guess, engineering-led in its tone of voice. And the whole goal is to make it incredibly legible at a tiny size and to make sure it has personality at a very large size. And then we spent 3 years developing all the characters for them to be able to run in 400 different languages. And it's about taking similar characteristics and then looking at different scripts and how does that all work together. And we used and worked with local type designers to help make this happen, so that we wanted it to be authentic and coming out of a local culture, rather than us coming and saying, well, you know, we know better, we're just going to redesign your language. So we wanted to reverse that. Here's a sort of sample of some of the different languages and scripts that we had to deal with. But they were all held together by things like this. So every language has a way of strokes joining. So how do we make that common? How do we treat, these are called spurs, and I don't mean Tottenham, even though they're brilliant. But what is the language of the spur? What's the proportionate similarity in there? As I just mentioned, how does the terminal end? So for all of them, it's the same system. So then you end up with exceptions, like Arabic, where there's a different kind of rhythm. Cyrillic has these different kinds of shapes, these saw teeth at the base. And then Greek has a much more kind of script or freehand approach. And then it's invisible again. The idea is that you don't see it, but it's doing so much hard work underneath the bonnet. We did this, which we're really proud of. It's the England. I didn't play. I've got to replace that with one of their own names. It's so embarrassing. Yeah, this was great. It was an honour to do. We wanted something. We actually wanted to push something much more radical than this, but FIFA objected because they said it has to be readable. We said, why does it have to be readable? Everyone knows who every player is, and a lot of people are going to watch on their mobiles anyway, so it's not going to make any difference. And each player knows who everyone is, and then the referee does, and then commentators. But FIFA insisted on legibility. So this is the font we did for the names and the numbers. And just a thought about education. Yeah, education is critical, and I think it's never been more critical right now, because I think certainly in our creative education spaces, this is where we need to be challenged. we need ideas to be coming out that say it doesn't have to be like this, or why should we accept that, or have you thought about doing it a different way? So your opportunity to experiment in your education space will possibly never come up again. So just grasp that, and even if you fail, you won't fail. They're not going to fail you anyway. Are you mad? Are you going to fail? No. So you'd have to be really bad or not do any work to fail.
You have to turn up.
Huh?
You have to turn up. Yeah.
If you turn up.
Yeah.
So okay. So if you turn up, you probably won't fail. Is that right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's the key. And I think more and more we're working into this space. We call it post-disciplinarity. We used to talk about cross-discipline, but that doesn't exist anymore. It's not about you do visual design and you work with someone that does sound design, someone else that does motion graphics. You'll be doing all of those things. You might even be doing painting, or you might be doing filmmaking. But when graphic design started, going back to Dadaism, they didn't call themselves painters or illustrators or photographers. They were just artists, they were just communicators. And I think we're coming back to that way of looking at what our practice is. You know, just be brave, just do anything, dive in, learn. And that means that the solution to a project might not be a poster, or it might not be a website, it might be a piece of sound, or it might be a physical installation in a store, or it might be an event. So limiting yourselves to what you think is your practice is exactly that, it's a limitation. So just think outside the box and just bring all that stuff in and experiment. I think that's always been at the heart of healthy culture, is when those things collide. And I just wanted to show you, this is just some rough grabs of the sort of stuff we were doing at the RCA. And it's all just very much outside what you would imagine like conventional practice to be. You know, it's experimenting using different objects and repurposing objects, repurposing spaces, making things that force new behaviours. And then some traditional stuff, so this is print, posters, but again, still challenging what they should be doing. One of my students pushing a blue elephant around Hyde Park, of course. Things like this. It's like, you know, I'm a big fan of William Burroughs. William Burroughs, the writer, said that you can't sit down and think of something new. It won't happen. What you can do is bring two different things together and then look at what comes out of that. So he invented something called, with Brian Geisen, the cut-up technique, where he would take a page from a book, cut it in half, take another half of another page and put them together. And then as a writer would join them. And a lot of his books came out of that. So the narratives, the ideas were all by accident. So combining things, seeing what comes out of it. And then this is show different materials, using light. A VR set made with cardboard and wood that worked. This is typical workshopping. And then stuff that you don't think is to do with graphic design, even. Making graphic design as physical stuff. So it's not even graphic design anymore, it's just communication and engagement and narratives. Bricks in silver. Yeah, so that's, this is a miniature library someone did for their show. This was great. You put your finger in here and it would pick up your heartbeat and then synchronize the drum with it. So you could broadcast your heart. I think I'm going to call it at that.
Okay.
There's more, but I think we're done. Right?
Great.
I don't know if any of that was relevant.
It was incredibly insightful, I thought. Lots of really nice sort of sketchbook style slides, which was really nice. It was very demystifying and sort of giving a real insight into your practice. So we've got about 10 minutes now for some questions. So,
Or not.
Yeah. Because
I'll sit down.
Neville's going to be doing a podcast at 4 with a couple of our students, so we do need to give them a bit of a break. So we're going to have 10 minutes of questions. So maybe just have a little think if you have any questions. Yeah.
What is the shortest time it took you to make?
Can you maybe stand up so everyone can hear your question?
Oh yeah. What is the shortest time that it took you to like make a typeface? What software did you use? Did you use is it possible to do that with just Illustrator, or is there any other software that you use?
Well, yeah. So the question was about how easy is it to design a font and produce one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you want to do. You can do a typeface in a few hours, but it depends on what kind of typeface you want to do. And you can design it in Illustrator, but you'd need a program like Glyphs. There's specific software, but we tend to use Glyphs more than anything. It's still easy to use. It's like using Illustrator, but consecutively. And there's videos you can learn online, but yeah, anyone can be doing that.
Thank you.
Yes. So I was really struck by the image that you started with, which is like seeing. I hope I got it right. But it's like seeing the history of design as like trying to interrupt people. Like the poster being this thing where it's almost like, what I understood was like, it's kind of like you're outside the shop and you're trying to stop somebody. You're trying to interrupt them and say, stop and come into the shop. But in lots of different ways. But then thinking about now, everybody's already in the shop. And it's like, please God, let me just take their money before they leave. So the role of design being this like frictionless thing, they call it, don't they?
Yeah, well, we talked about So it's quite interesting. That's a big subject for me right now. I've actually bought the URL with Jeremy Leslie, who runs Mag Culture. Do you know Mag Culture? So for anyone that doesn't know Mag Culture is the independent magazine store over near Clerkenwell. And it's brilliant. There's like 400, 600 titles in there, all independent publishing. And it's such an interesting kind of book space. But we're launching a website called Design is Friction. And I think that's just something, I mean, you're right. It's like, otherwise we just become, pay by card, pay by phones. And that's it. So, there's always a need for us to be working with others to create complex cultures outside that. Otherwise, I mean, we could probably get rich delivering people to sales.
But it's sort of like, it just occurred to me that it was interesting that exists, and then could there be friction put back into that frictionless world? It seems to be a kind of fights with that, I don't know, corporate, easy website design.
Yeah, but
It's weird, isn't it?
Yeah, it's weird, but I'm sort of obsessed right now with how reduced social media and digital experiences have become. And there's no complexity anymore. And more than that, there's no grey area, so there's no nuance. Because everything has to become so simplified, because it has to be like that. But the problem with that is it sets up contradictions that get amplified by algorithms. So the algorithms then will amplify a difference. So then it becomes, a whole experience is me versus you in the end, or Brexit versus Remain, or Make America Great Again, or You're a Traitor. Or, and then you go beyond that, you have these things that are called condensation symbols, where a complex idea is reduced to a slogan or a logo. And advertising brands always did it, so Just Do It is a typical, or I'm Loving It, or, so those are typical, but Make America Great Again, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, Brexit, these are all condensation symbols. And the problem with them is that they can't be questioned. There's no grey discussion area. So then you just have opposition, and then you have the Middle East war, and then you have, there's no kind of middle ground. So I think our role is to keep creating platforms that add complexity and difficulty and discussion. Sorry, I didn't ask you a question.
No, it's the conversation, isn't it? My favourite article was in The Guardian was talking about the idea that Brexit means Brexit is a new way of describing a really dirty tackle in schools. They want to be taught that Brexit means Brexit tackle, which is amazing because it's that sealed slogan that's then repurposed and made like hilarious.
Yeah, and reform. Reform UK. Is that deform UK?
Thank you for that, it was really good. You've got a lot of stuff in there about simplistic things that being complicated.
Can you hear it back? Sorry, mate, you're going to have to.
You've got elements there where you've made typography complicated, which could be quite simple, and the love for complexity. What about, have you ever explored design where it's data visualization of actually taking a really complex data set and doing something with that?
Well, graphic design actually is usually it's a translation of complexity into visually connected. So, I mean, even designing one of those fonts, I think, is about taking complex ideas and yeah, we do stuff with complex data sets, creating simple or simplified diagrams and illustrations, and a lot of that actually is more used in the tools where we are working with a client and helping them understand structures than anything. But yeah, I mean, I believe in, as I said, I believe in being totally reductive as well, simplistic, as well as embracing real difficulty. But it all comes down to what is your intention at any point. At the RCA, we always teach around, define what your intention is, and then you can figure out who it is with, and then what are the tools you have to create. So we our intention first on everything. That probably didn't answer that either.
No, that's very helpful, thank you.
Thanks.
Yes.
Hi, I'm an undergrad at LCC.
Oh really? I went,
I went
there.
Yeah.
I got failed, by the way.
Sorry?
I was failed. Well, all the internal tutors failed. But the external tutors gave me a first.
Too rebellious.
No, I don't know. They just one of them said to me, "Now we understand that you're a punk designer." Anyway, sorry, go on.
Yeah. So we're at the very beginning of our graphic design journeys, and
Can you speak up a little bit?
so we're at the beginning of our graphic design journeys, right? So and then because this is kind of new to us, so you might feel stumped by the briefs that are given to us, especially if we're not the target demographic at all. And this is probably a really obvious answer, but does it get better with experience? Have you had in the past, have you ever been super stumped by a brief in the past?
Of course.
Yeah.
You
Like,
just- you-
like, do you have any tips on like building confidence in the camp?
So I think, so that's just a traditional structure where you're being taught a vocation, so therefore we're going to make it as real as possible. But it's not real, number one. And number two, it's about you. It's not about your tutors. It's not about the institution. It's not about these fake clients. It's about you. You're there to develop your ability, not to fit into something. So you should always just use a brief as a starting point to explore ideas. As I said, they're not going to fail, but you should use those as catalysts for exploring stuff. And you know, there is no one answer to any of those briefs. There's no fixed way to do anything. So just use it as an excuse to experiment and explore and challenge and fail and all of that. You know, it doesn't matter. There's no fake client going to fire you. You know, it's the staff that have to be there again next year that you need to feel sorry for.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. Anybody else? Any questions? Yes, Alex.
Looking at the education you're doing in the RCA, it looks very ideas-based, but looking at your studio work, it's very technical. Where do you see technical skills education coming into? Is it stuff they've already got when they get to the RCA, or is it stuff they learn in the industry afterwards?
So there's something interesting we've realised, which is that in terms of technical skills, we can't teach anything. Because in terms of resourcing knowledge, our students probably can do it much better than us because they know how and where and how quickly they can find information. You know, training videos for how to use certain things. Of course, hands-on is important, but they can find information much quicker than us. It's much more part of the culture. What we can do, I think, is give guidance. So with the RCA, I saw that historically it was top down. Like, you're a teacher, I'm a teacher, I have this knowledge, I'm going to give it to you. Now it's like, oh, you can get all this knowledge, but do you know what to do with it? So the position has gone from, I think, a top down to a bottom up supportive.
Yep.
I have a question. With the rise of AI, do you think being a graphic designer will be impacting everyone in this room, or people who won't take that?
Let's start with AI. Being a human being, how will it impact us? It'll impact everything, except right now, nails, hair, and gardening. Pretty much everything else will be impacted heavily by AI. But you know, I know when the personal computer came along, people were A, dismissive, or B, terrified of that. And there are graphic designers who said it's all over for graphic design, or I will never touch one of these. And AI is the same. We just have to learn how to use it, because it still needs a human sensibility, no matter what. You know, visually right now, most AI stuff looks crap. Sort of bad airbrushing, very kitsch. And it's put together by people that just want to be virtuosos. They just want to say, look how skilled I am at this. But the danger will be that it will replace a whole area of society. I mean, areas like financial services, online shopping, retail. But I still think we will need the individual human artist. And someone to try and make it go wrong. So, are we done?
I've got plenty of questions, but I'm going to save them for the podcast, so I'll give you a break. Okay, cool. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.